This is an Aristocraft Southern Pacific flat car that has the original unlowered floor. This is of an older generation. The newer generation Aristocraft 40-foot cars, which include boxcars, stock cars, reefers, and flat cars and gondolas, have the lowered floors. But the ones I have for the flat cars all have the original floors that have the taller bolsters. And so I've been able to lower it rather than buying a lowered floor for it, which presents more difficulties in a flat car because the flat car is made with these plugs here that normally would be open if you just bought a lowered floor. And also, in this case, this car had the side frames glued on it. So at any rate, I decided to lower it with the same method I used on the covered hoppers, the 70-ton Aristocraft covered hoppers, and I was able to lower them rather than cutting out bolsters or making new bolsters like some people have done in the so-called prior art methods. This I used USA Trains 2033 Bettendorf trucks, and you can cut them down and basically lower the truck rather than lower the car. So what I've been able to do, and this is a stock one and hasn't been cut back to lower it yet, but what I've been able to do is cut material off the pocket here on the side frame, and also corresponding material off the bolster part, so that the truck could be lowered rather than the car. In the case of the 70-ton hopper, I was able to lower it by 220 thousandths of an inch. In this case, with the bolsters that are on these non-lowered original floors, about 200 thousandths is about the maximum you can lower it. So I've done that. In this case, I've lowered these trucks 200 thousandths, and again, these are USA Trains trucks. In this case, I put the Aristo wheels, metal wheels, 2911 ART 2911Bs. You can use the USA Train wheels, and they're a little bit smaller in diameter, so the car would be lowered, a modicum amount, even below what I've done here. So what you can see here is how the USA Trains trucks fit, and what you have to do, and you can't see it here, but I had to put file notches on the bolster in addition to lowering the truck so that it can freely pivot. And I also had to take some ribbing off of the bolster, these two inboard ribs. I had to take those two off, so the truck wouldn't bind when you would turn it. Another thing I did was add weight to the car. This car weighs, the way it comes from the factory, although retrofitted with Aristo metal wheels, it weighs 1.7 pounds thereabout. And I've done two methods to add weight to it. What I've done for the first part was to put lead weight in the spine of the car, and these little plastic plugs kind of cover it up. And the lead weight used is this number 9 shot that you can buy in a gun store, which I did in a 25-pound bag. You buy it in bulk. I forget how much I paid for it, but I think it was $35 thereabout in a 25-pound bag. But that'll go a long way for all the cars you might want to use it for. So it's convenient to put it in these pockets here, particularly the larger ones, and also the end bolsters. In the case of this non-lowered floor type, the end bolsters are actually bigger, and of course that's what Aristo did to lower the floor. They made the end bolsters more shallow, and here's a floor here that's been taken out of a car. It's the original non-lowered floor type, and it has a taller truck bolster here. And what I've been able to do is drill a hole, down near the base where the ribbing is, and actually pour the lead shot into it. So I was able to add, by doing this method, by adding this lead shot into the truck bolsters, both ends, and along these 5 places or so on the spine of the car, I was able to add a half a pound of weight. So that brought the car from 1.9 pound or 1.7 pounds to 2.2 pounds. And in addition to that, I bought this square tubing, 1/2 inch by 1/2 inch welded tubing. It's hollow, and I poured lead shot down the hollow part and plugged it, with these plastic plugs. And the plugs I used were actually the part of the tang of the USA truck coupler you have to cut off so it clears the axle when the axle would interfere otherwise when you lower the truck. So it came in handy to salvage that. I just took these plugs and put a little bit of glue, but they're press fit anyway, and then poured the lead shot down in there, and then put the plug in the end, and that's what these things mounted here now, and they're kind of nestled against the belly of the drop center of or I shouldn't say drop center, but the center of the car. And in this case, the way the Aristo one is made, it kind of curves inboard. So all you need is a little clip here. It's got a little fork in there to keep it from twisting. And it's not glued or anything, and it just stays right in there. And you can kind of bend the clip a little bit to make sure it's secure. And if you had any doubts, you could put a dab of silicone and say either or 3 spots and use the clip too. But in this case, I didn't have to do that, and I've done 2 cars that way. So by adding these extra weights, that added a 7/10 of a pound more for the both of them. Each one's about 0.35 pounds. So that brought the total weight of the flat car up to 2.9 pounds. Now that compares with an Aristo box car, for example, when you have Aristo metal wheels in it. The box car will weigh about 2 3/4 pounds. So this is actually heavier. Now all this effort is to prevent the car from stringlining around a curve. In my case, I have an underhouse layout with a 270-degree loop back, and it's 10-foot diameter track. And when you have a long, heavy train, in my case 62 cars, I can put these on the front of the train, unloaded, and they'll actually perform better than the box cars, or it's really not too discernible when you actually watch it going around the curve. There's a tendency to try to lift the wheels up on the cars in a certain spot on that curve when you're exiting the 270-degree loop back, when the train's looping around with the engine. Again, the engines are coupled. This car is coupled to the lead engines, and it doesn't stringline, and that's the benefit of doing this. Now, some people would say, well, let's put a load on the car, but I've seen a lot of cars in pictures and books, a lot of flat cars behind the locos of the train, and they have this big long train. And so this is a way to replicate the prototype operation, and it takes a little time maybe to do the modifications to the truck, and what you have to do to kind of file little notches in the bulkhead. Now this one's not modified here, but the notches basically have to go where the screw would be. You take the screws out, and then you take a file, and you count 6 rivets up from the ends, and it's about 2 rivets worth of notching, and just notch a kind of a horizontal trough in there, and that allows the truck to pivot from side to side and still able to lower the car by 2/10 of an inch. So there you have it. Now, in addition to lowering the car, this flat car, and weighting it with extra weight, I also retrofitted KD 907 type Generation E couplers on it. And they take up a small footprint, look very realistic. You can see it here. And I was able to do that by basically making a bracket. Let me get this over here. By making metal brackets, and you can kind of see the bracket under here. It's mounted with 2 screws. But by putting a bracket on that, in one case, fastens to the rib of the bulkhead. Here's a bulkhead, and the bracket would fasten to the back side of this rib in one case, and that allows you to put a screw in it without having to drill an ugly hole in the top here where you would see it. So I made these special brackets, and then cut a slot, of course, in the end bulkhead of the car so the KD coupler box would nestle in there, and it worked quite well. Now here are the 2 flat cars, or there are 2 flat cars in this test track up in my loft. The one on the right is the SP one I had lowered, as previously described, and put the KD center set 907 couplers on it. And the one on the left is a Western Pacific one. which is stock factory Aristo, including with the truck-mounted couplers still, the Aristo couplers. And it is not lowered. Now both these cars are made with the older type older type floors that the Aristo subsequently lowered and put into their more current production runs. So in this case you can see the KD coupler with the KD 980 gauge lines up quite nicely with how it was done and notched out on the end here. And the car is very prototypically realistic, with the trucks kind of more up enveloped by the framing of the car. And with the added weight, as I previously described, you really can't see anything in there. And of course you wouldn't see it in the spine of the car where it's added. And even the square metal tubing that's nestled, hidden behind this belly part of the car on either side, you can't really even see that. Now here's a comparison between the two cars. I'll put this white backdrop there, and you can see it's even the lowered one is 0.2 of an inch lower than the one on the left, and you can see it's profound enough to the eye that you can notice the difference. Now again, these are USA trucks, USA Trains truck, Bettendorf trucks number 2033 is their part number, that I used to I lowered the truck bolster within the truck rather than, lower the car itself, and by doing that you lower the car. And this is the original Aristo Bettendorf truck. Another thing about the comparison of the trucks is, though the Aristo ones have equalizing springs, you can compress the car, you can't do that with the USA Trains truck, and of course that's what afforded the ability to lower it, because you didn't have that mechanism in the way. And the way USA Trains made the pocket of how the bolster fits in a pocket of the side frame, it was readily able to lower. It allowed the truck to be lowered. You can't do that with the Aristo truck. On the other hand, the prototypical nature of the car favors the USA Trains truck, because the wheelbase between the hot boxes here is 5.6 inches when you scale it to prototype. In the case of the Aristo, it's 5.8 inches. So these cars, or cars like them in their day, had 5.8 inch wheelbase trucks. They weren't very common at all. Most of them were 5.6. So you can make a rationale that the USA Trains trucks are really more realistic. So at any rate, you can see the difference between the cars here. And I left the stake pockets out of the SP one, and I also removed the additional brake wheel assembly that Aristo puts on both ends of the car. And that's again another very rare circumstance you might find. I've seen in books. You really can't find any cars that dual brake wheels, with some exceptions. The exception I found was an Atlantic Coastline flat car that had them, but none of the other books I have show that method of having double brake wheels on these flat cars. And in general, most cars only have one brake wheel assembly at one end. And the one I chose to remove is nearest the air tank. And there's the air tank under the car. That's the one that you should eliminate, because it seems as though all the books I've checked, the air tank is always further toward the rear of the car versus the front, and the brake wheel is typically on the opposite end. So, for years Aristocraft had their floors put in backwards on their boxcar stock cars, of course flat cars, but with two brake wheels on a flat car it wouldn't matter. So, and reefer cars too. And they had been backwards for about almost 20 years of production, and finally they changed it to correct it. So at any rate, this car has the nice KD couplers, and it's able to operate on the layout without string lining. It actually weighs at 2.9 pounds. This original one on the left is 1.7 pounds, and it weighs more than a box car, with, of course, with metal wheels too, comparing apples to apples. So the boxcar weighs about 2 3/4 pounds. So there's no string lining issue when operating on the layout. And there you have it.